Today I'm going to be making a baked macaroni and cheese, or as we call it in my house, macaroni pie. I typically make very large portions and we kind of live off leftovers in my house. So I always make a large batch in my 9x13 pan. If you want a smaller batch, in whatever this size is, then just cut the ingredients in half. So what I'm going to be using is this whole brick of cheese. It's 400 grams. I'm going to be using 4 eggs, some mustard powder, some white pepper, 2 cans of evaporated milk, half a cup of butter, and whatever kind of pasta you feel like using. I happen to like using these curly noodles, so this is what I'm going to use. So I'm going to go ahead and measure out the amount that I need to make my macaroni pie, and I'm going to grate the cheese, and then we can go ahead and get started. Okay, so I've grated up all my cheese and I measured out my pasta. And the way I measure my pasta is I just pour the raw pasta into my baking dish until it comes up about halfway, because as it cooks it is going to swell. In this case it took about 3/4 of the bag of the pasta that I was using. So that's what we're going to make today. I've got my water boiling, and it's a rolling boil, so obviously that's what you want when you're cooking pasta. And I've salted my water. So I'm going to go ahead and put the pasta in there and get it going. The instructions on the package said to boil it for 4 minutes, and I know that's not going to be long enough. I always end up boiling my pasta longer than the recommended time because it just doesn't seem like it's done if I follow the package directions. That's my personal opinion. So cook it to however you like it to be done. And I'm going to go ahead and start my oven baking as well, or preheating. So we're going to preheat the oven to 350 because that's what it's going to bake on. And I'm going to go ahead and get the pasta boiling. While the pasta is boiling, you can go ahead and get started on the custard. So I've cracked my eggs into a large bowl and I'm going to whisk them. If you don't have a whisk, you can just use a fork. But I'm going to whisk them up with 1 teaspoon of white pepper and 2 teaspoons of the ground mustard. And then once that's incorporated, I'm going to slowly whisk in all of the evaporated milk, and that's going to create the custard base for the macaroni pie. So it took about 10 minutes for the pasta to be cooked to the level that I prefer. While that was cooking, I went ahead and I prepared my custard base. So I've got the eggs, the seasonings, and the evaporated milk in here. The cheese is grated. That's going to be added, of course. I used a little bit of the butter just to grease the pan so that the macaroni pie won't stick while it's baking. And I've got the rest of the butter melting in my pot. So I'm going to go ahead and add the pasta in here and give that a stir, and then we'll continue from there. I forgot to mention that I turned the heat down to low after I took the boiling pasta off of the stove, because you don't want it too high or you're going to end up curdling the custard mixture when you put it in here. So I'm going to go ahead and add all of the custard mixture in here. And I'm going to go ahead and give that a stir, and then I'm going to add most of the cheese, but I do like to leave just a little bit of the cheese to sprinkle on top. But most of it's going to go ahead and go in here, and then we just need to melt the cheese before we can put it into the baking pan. So I've added all the cheese, and it's just taking a minute for it to melt down, but once it's all melted and I'm not really seeing little bits of cheese in here anymore, and then I'm going to go ahead and put it into my baking pan. But I'm not going to top it with the last of the cheese right away, and I'll show you why when I get to that step. Okay, so my macaroni's in my roasting pan and it's ready to go into the oven. It's fully preheated to 350 now. Now the reason I don't put the last of the cheese on top right away is because you're only going to put it in the oven for about 10 minutes, and then you need to take it out and give it a good stir and then put it back in the oven for another 20-ish minutes. It takes about half an hour to cook. So I put the cheese on top after it goes back into the oven for the second round. So the first 10 minutes is done, and I'm going to attempt to stir this without making a huge mess in my oven, which I normally do, in all honesty. So what I like to do is kind of go out to the edges and bring it into the center. Try and make as little mess as possible. So So I'm gonna do this all the way around, and I wanna do it quickly so the heat doesn't all come out of my oven. So I'm gonna put the phone down for a minute here. And you can see it's all mixed and it's nice and creamy looking. So I'm gonna go ahead and top it with the last of my cheese really quickly here. And then pop it back into the oven for another 20 minutes. Now I know some people who like to top it with like a seasoned breadcrumbs. You can sprinkle a little parsley on top of it if you want a little bit of green. I just like the cheese. It's kind of the whole point of this dish is the cheese. All right, you can see I spilled a little bit, but not too bad this time around. So yeah, I'm gonna put that back in the oven, set my timer for 20 minutes, and then we'll come and get it out. I just took my macaroni pie out of the oven, and if you listen carefully, you can probably hear it sizzling. This is perfect. This is exactly what I like. I don't like when the cheese gets too brown on the top, because to me, when cheese browns, it tastes burned. I just don't enjoy it. So this is exactly what I was hoping for. Usually I can get about 16 good-sized servings out of this. If it's a little bit more shallow, like sometimes when I cook it, it's actually, oh, it kind of is still coming up over the top of my pan. Sometimes it's a little bit higher. You can cut them to whatever size that you like. Usually we just have this as a side dish. I make this every Thanksgiving and every Christmas. And sometimes I'll just make it like at some random time. Usually if I do that, I'll have stewed chicken with it because I really like the gravy from the stewed chicken on the macaroni pie. But really, it's a side dish you can have whenever you want. And I hope you enjoy it.